greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
EA looked at that iconic scene and basically said, "Hold my beer."
Man, I have to pay a microtransaction to unlock? That's so stupid that this has to...
Well, it's hard to believe now, but EA wasn't always the punchline. They were actually the good guys.
It's really a shame, isn't it, that when we become adults, we're kind of told that you're supposed to stop playing.
But like EA, I need recurring engagement. So hit subscribe and let me show you how a home for artists became a $55 billion casino. May 27th, 1982. Trip Hawkins uses $200,000 of his own money to start Electronic Arts. The original name of the company was actually Amazin Software.
After I hired several employees and people had to answer the phone and say, "Amazing Software," people were thinking, I think this name's kind of silly and we should have a different name.
Now, how does a 29-year-old have that kind of money to start a business? Well, Tripp was one of the first 50 employees at Apple, and when it went public in 1982, he made a nice chunk of change.
We really do have the sense of really being obsessed with it and really believing that we know how to do it better than everybody else.
He was just a visionary. He went to school at Harvard, MBA from Stanford.
Went to Apple, spent a great deal of time working with Steve Jobs.
So he left Apple and recruited a few more coworkers from Apple. He believed games deserved the same respect as music and movies. To him, games were art, hence the name.
I think that software is an art form, and it's becoming more and more artful all the time.
He wanted to turn faceless programmers into cultural icons.
When I do something, I don't crank out 500 copies just for the money.
EA packaged games like vinyl records, oversized album-style boxes with the developers' faces and names on the back. They ran full-page print ads with designers lined up to look like a rock band. Tripp built EA as a place for creators willing to take risks.
Electronic Arts has created its own society and its own culture.
Introducing EA's new philosophy to the world. Can a computer make you cry?
Now that marketing slogan might sound a bit pretentious now, but back then computers were seen as weird, and games were for kids. Tripp, who learned from Steve Jobs, wanted to make games feel more human, to tap into the emotion of games, or software as they put it at the time. And the games proved it. Archon featured chess-like gameplay with real-time combat elements, making it a cult classic. Mule, which was an early multiplayer game allowing players to compete in futuristic colonization scenarios. There was Pinball Construction Set. It had a revolutionary game creation tool at the time, letting users build and customize their own pinball tables. And then they had successful early sports titles, which would be something they would be known for later on. Dr. J vs. Larry Bird and Skate or Die. But once EA got a taste of growth, they wanted more, and more, and more, and more. And that's when things started to change. By the early 90s, EA dominated. They became the big league publisher. In 1991, Tripp stepped down as CEO, but stayed on the board of EA. His focus was now to launch 3DO, his own next-gen console. Enter Larry Probst, who took over as CEO. Larry was a more traditional salesperson who came from the world of pharmaceuticals and cleaning products. Exactly the right background to lead an innovative and creative games company. And this right here is where you could say EA's culture changed. Forever. The Artist First founder was out. And that's when the questions went from, what's our next masterpiece, to, what are we promising investors this quarter? Fast forward to 2004, the infamous blog post known as EA Spouse blew up online. It was posted anonymously and exposed brutal working conditions. EA developers forced to work mandatory 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. shifts 7 days a week for weeks at a time.
They were getting Jamba Juice, and that was kind of considered your half meal, and then they would buy dinner. So you basically were expected not to leave, and then you were expected to come in on weekends. There was this group think just from people death marching for so long. They were trained not to rock the boat about fundamental issues with the game.
That blog sparked class action lawsuits and forced EA to reclassify some employees so they could get paid overtime. EA's reputation took a hit, but that didn't stop it from growing. In 2007, Larry Probst stepped down as CEO. John Riccitiello took over and doubled down on live services and mobile. And this is where EA really started optimizing for monetization. EA's new mission wasn't empower creators, it became acquire everything and own the market. BioWare, Maxis, Pandemic, and Visceral were all screwed up. Well, actually scooped up, I should say. Yeah, well, screwed and scooped up, I guess. Either way, they were forced into what internally became known as the annualized pipeline, which is a nice corporate way to say, you release games whether it's ready or not. Take SimCity for example. Maxis, the studio that pioneered sim games and responsible for one of my all-time favorite games, SimCity 3000, was now suddenly forced to crank out games on a schedule designed by EA executives, not the game makers. And that resulted in the absolute disaster of SimCity 2013. It launched with mandatory online DRM, broken servers, and a game that wouldn't let you play the city you just built if EA's servers were down. EA later offered free games as an apology. It didn't matter though, creativity was no longer the priority. It's like that classic scene in Moneyball where you stop thinking about the baseball player as a unique talent and start viewing him as some tradable asset defined by his on-base percentage. To EA, these games and studios were just numbers on a spreadsheet. They stopped seeing studios like BioWare as the master storyteller behind games like Mass Effect and, one of my favorites, Jade Empire. Still waiting on my sequel. Instead, they viewed them as a team maximized for predictable annual income. But even that wasn't enough. EA would soon discover something more powerful than yearly sequels. A business model that didn't just sell a game once, but over and over and over, basically forever. The year is 2009. EA releases FIFA Ultimate Team. At first, it looks like just another mode inside a sports game, collect players, build your dream squad, play online. But instead of buying the specific player you want, you buy packs. Maybe you get some bum player, or maybe you get a superstar like Messi or Ronaldo. Psychologists have a very technical name for this, a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. The reward is unpredictable, so your brain keeps craving the next hit. Basically, you're gambling. It's the same hook that powers slot machines. Turning people into mindless zombies, feeding the slot machine money after every pull of that lever, in the hopes that they hit it big. And to put even more psychological pressure, timed events push urgency. Get this now or you'll miss out. By 2016, Ultimate Team modes in FIFA, Madden, and NHL were pulling in around $650 million per year. And within a few years, Ultimate Team content alone made up over 20 to 25% of the company's revenue, just from Ultimate Team modes. Internally, EA executives described Ultimate Team as the cornerstone and to quote, do everything we can to drive players to Ultimate Team. So the message to every studio became simple, find its Ultimate Team. Didn't matter what game genre a studio was making, it was about how to maximize spending. Game studios that had been known for single-player experiences suddenly found themselves judged against live service metrics. Before this Ultimate Team push, they'd focus on a compelling story for the game, characters, gameplay mechanics. Now, it was all about daily active users, 30-day retention, and average revenue per paying user. An ex-EA developer once described the internal mantra as, find the tonally appropriate moments of currency conversion. Translation, find places in your game where players are most likely to accept a purchase screen. Take Visceral Games for example, the studio behind one of the best survival horror games of all time, Dead Space. They were working on a dream project, a single-player narrative-driven Star Wars heist game directed by games legend Amy Hennig. She was one of the creative minds behind the Uncharted game, now working with a proven game studio fresh off an acclaimed title, working on one of the largest sci-fi IPs in the world, on a very cool concept at the time. Sounds great, right? Well, so behind the scenes, EA pulled resources, shuffled staff, and in 2017, they shut down Visceral and rebooted the Star Wars project at another studio as a broader games as a service concept. One and done games with no battle pass, no loot box, no Ultimate Team style spending didn't fit the model anymore. Across the company, more studios faded out. Pandemic, gone. Westwood, absorbed, then gone. Maxis? Sadly gutted. BioWare survived, but let's be honest, they're a shell of their former selves. One by one, the creative voices that once made EA special were drowned out by service model economics. EA's shift didn't just impact the business. Real people got hurt. Kids began racking up huge credit card charges. Parents would check their statements and see hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars charged. Some kids showed addiction-like behavior patterns similar to gamblers. Governments finally started asking questions. They realized that it was a pay-to-win system wrapped in addictive gambling mechanics. Meanwhile, EA's financial filings used phrases like deep, engaging, recurring user experience. See the keyword there? Recurring. Not fun, not memorable, just recurring. As lawsuits and public outcry grew, EA executives doubled down. The money was way too good. By the late 2010s, EA kept landing on worst company in America lists. They even beat out actual banks during one of the worst financial crises in recent history. I mean, that is how hated EA was. The era of John Riccitiello with aggressive expansion, live services, and monetization-first design had run its course. Well, at least with EA. He'd go on to pillage, extract, and destroy another company. But in 2013, the cash register was handed off to a new CEO, Andrew Wilson. He wouldn't invent EA's worst instincts. Riccitiello already laid that groundwork. Nah, Wilson would just inject steroids into them. Years of frustration and resentment finally blew up. This game should have been the easiest slam dunk in EA history. Gorgeous Frostbite graphics, iconic characters, huge marketing push, and Star Wars is as close to guaranteed money as you can get. Well, at least back then. So when you pay good money for the game, you expect to play iconic characters like Luke, Vader, and even Chewie out of the box. Yeah, not really. They were locked behind a crazy long grind, or, hey, you want to play these iconic characters? Well, you can always pay for randomized loot boxes. This wasn't just pay to win, it was pay to play as a character you bought the game for. And of course, customers and fans thought that was a reasonable business practice. No, of course I'm just kidding. They were outraged, obviously. Reddit threads exploded, YouTubers practically lost their minds. The geniuses at EA thought they'd calm things down with an official post on Reddit, claiming the system was designed to give players, quote, a sense of pride and accomplishment. I'm sure that after weeks of all-hands meetings with the PR and comms team crafting the perfect word salad, that these executives thought that, hey, this'll end the backlash. Nope. That post went on to become the most downvoted post in Reddit history, and actually making it into the Guinness Book of World Records. Eventually, EA admitted they got it wrong, and made some changes to the game. But it wasn't enough to stop what was to come. The outrage didn't stop with Reddit threads. Governments stepped in. Belgium was first, in 2018 officially classifying loot boxes as a form of gambling and banning them outright. That standoff triggered criminal investigation pressure in Belgium, and by early 2019, EA finally agreed to stop selling FIFA points in the country. In their mind, Belgium is a relatively small market. Maybe it would go away quietly now. Nah, not quite. By 2019, EA was sitting in front of UK lawmakers trying to defend the loot box model.
Well, first, we don't call them loot boxes. I think that was
whatever term you wish to apply to them. Do you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics, but I think it's important to look at this. So this is something people enjoy. They enjoy surprises, and so we do think the way that we have implemented these kind of mechanics, and FIFA, of course, is our big one, our FIFA Ultimate Team and our packs, is actually quite ethical and quite fun, enjoyable to people. Our FIFA packs, so in Belgium, after discussions with the government and the regulator, we made a business decision to turn off the sale of points in Belgium. That's the only change we've made. I have no...
A government would have to make a ruling and legislate against something before you will take action.
I think that's a really broad mischaracterization. But I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm not sure that it does, but
Then, the Netherlands followed. In 2020, Dutch regulators ruled that FIFA's loot boxes violated gambling law and threatened EA with fines of up to 10 million euros unless the system was removed. EA refused to back down though, insisting its loot boxes were not gambling. They spent millions in legal defense, and after a couple of years, the country's highest administrative court overturned the penalty, ruling that Ultimate Team packs were part of the broader skill-based game. But the legal fights didn't end there. Up next, Austria. In 2023, a district court ruled that FIFA Ultimate Team packs violated Austria's gambling monopoly. The court even ordered Sony to refund players who had bought the game. Then, the floodgates opened. More than 1,000 FIFA players filed claims. Some had spent 800 euros, others had spent up to 85,000 euros chasing digital cards. A Vienna court even ordered Sony and EA to refund over 10,000 euros to a single player. But just 1 month later, a higher Austrian court reversed the ruling, declaring FIFA packs were not gambling, and arguing players didn't purchase them with the intent to profit. This was becoming a huge headache now for Sony too. So EA had to figure out a solution. In 2023, the UK government worked with publishers, including EA, to establish 11 industry rules requiring clear labeling and disclosure of loot box mechanics. So yeah, EA actually helped write the very rules that they were to be regulated by. And you want to wonder how that went? Well, they got caught violating them. Their own rules. Their explanation? Human error. Now there was one good outcome from all of these legal threats. EA was forced to disclose the odds on their loot boxes. Now they still admitted those probabilities could change dynamically. But even then, EA couldn't resist themselves. They patented a system called Dynamic Difficulty Adjustment, a technology that alters gameplay in real time. Class action lawsuits accused EA of using the system to make players that customers just paid for feel worse, nudging users towards buying more packs. If your team doesn't feel good enough, hey, there's always another pack. EA denied the claims and got the case dropped after sharing technical details. Legally, that was the end of that. For players, not so much. Europe doesn't usually agree on much, languages, borders, currency, but they did agree that EA was essentially running a casino for kids. In 2020, the European Parliament put together a study on EA's loot boxes. That study specifically called out EA's FIFA Ultimate Team as a prime example of what they termed problematic game design. Because 60% of the top games contained loot boxes, and over 90% of those games were rated suitable for children aged 12 and up. So while EA was telling parents their games were quite ethical and quite fun, the data, that showed that they were deliberately targeting kids. One expert described loot boxes as a systematic attempt to turn gamers into gamblers. EA wasn't just using slot machine psychology. They were using every trick in the book. When you open a pack, those flashy animations build anticipation. And when the reward turns out average, it still feels like you are close. Psychologists call this a near-miss experience. So your brain thinks, I'm getting closer, I almost won. So you try again. But here's the thing, it's not almost random. The algorithm decided you weren't getting Ronaldo before the animation even started. It's designed to make you feel like you were so close that you should try again. Casinos have used this trick for decades. Players who experience near misses spend more time gambling and taking bigger risks afterward. EA knew this. Then there's the money illusion. Quick question, how much does an Ultimate Team pack cost? If you said 150 points or 300 coins, congrats, the system is working exactly as intended, because you're not thinking in real money anymore. The study identified virtual currencies as one of the most effective tools for encouraging overspending. Here's why. You're forced to buy them in bundles that don't exactly match pack prices. So you always have leftover currency, sitting there, begging to be used. Well, might as well buy another pack, I've already got 100 points left. Psychologists call this the reduced pain of paying. When you hand over cash, your brain registers the loss. When you spend points, your brain barely notices, especially to children. because kids' brains are still developing the ability to understand abstract concepts like exchange rates and probability. They don't sit there and calculate, well, that's 8 cents per point, and this pack costs 300 points, so that's $2.40 per pack, and if I want a 1% chance at getting Mbappe, I'll need to open roughly 100 packs, so no kid does that math. And come to think of it, most adults don't either. And EA, they know it. Then there's the FOMO, where there's a special card a player wants, but it's only available for a few days. After that, it's gone, maybe forever. That's called artificial scarcity. Here's what happens in your brain. Scarcity triggers a sense of urgency. You're no longer asking, do I want this? You're now asking, can I afford to miss this? And here's really the sinister part of it all. These aren't actually scarce. EA can create infinite digital cards. But by making them feel scarce, they can make them feel valuable. Players end up buying content they didn't plan to buy because they're afraid they'll regret it later. Psychologists call this anticipated regret, which brings us to the sunk cost trap. Say you've been grinding FIFA Ultimate Team for weeks. You spent $20, $30, maybe $100 on packs. But you still don't have that elite striker. You think to yourself, well, I've already invested so much time and money, if I quit now, it's all wasted. So you buy another pack, and another. Gambling researchers call this entrapment. Loot boxes deliberately exploit this. EA has systems that guarantee you'll eventually get something good if you spend enough. They're called pity timers. Most players don't even know they exist. Let's say you've opened 99 packs without getting a rare card. The algorithm makes sure that the 100th pack you open gives you something valuable. Why? To keep you from quitting entirely. Just enough reward to make you think, see, it works. I just need to keep going. Slot machine psychology. And finally, loot boxes don't just act like gambling, they look like it too. Flashing lights when you open a pack, victory sounds when you get something rare. Your brain associates those sounds and visuals with pleasure, even when you're not winning. The study also explained why they're especially effective on children. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control, doesn't fully develop until around the age of 25. Kids and teenagers can't resist these psychological tactics the way adults can. Research shows that children are far more likely than adults to choose immediate rewards over future benefits, and loot boxes exploit that. Kids also don't understand odds. Tell an adult this item has a 2% drop rate, they can grasp what that means. A kid doesn't. They think that rare events are more likely than they are. Kids also struggle to understand the value of money, especially when filtered through the virtual currency. 1,200 points doesn't feel like $10 to a child. It feels like points, game currency, it's meaningless. One researcher said that children are less able to disentangle costs. They don't connect points to mom's credit card or to real money that could buy food or pay rent. The study documented cases of children spending thousands of dollars. The exact demographic that EA targets is the most at risk of developing gambling problems. After hundreds of pages of research, after interviewing experts from psychology, gambling research, consumer protection, and the gaming industry, the European Parliament study concluded that EA's loot boxes were exploitative, manipulative, potentially harmful, especially to children. Then it made a recommendation. Stop treating this like a gambling issue. Start treating it like a consumer protection crisis. And to treat loot boxes like the predatory systems they are. And so in response, EA issued a heartfelt apology, removed loot boxes entirely, and donated all their profits to gambling addiction treatment centers for children. Yeah, right. EA generated $4.4 billion from microtransactions in 2024. 3/4 of EA's revenue comes from live services and Ultimate Teams. Only 25% comes from selling actual games. They get more money from getting people to spend more after they've already bought the game. There's no reason for them to change that. Then came the layoffs. In 2023, EA cut roughly 6% of its workforce, blaming a normalization after the pandemic boom. Investor language for the money slowed. But you know what didn't slow? Executive pay bonuses. In fiscal year 2024, CEO Andrew Wilson earned more than $25 million, which was an increase from previous years. To put things in perspective, the average median salary for an EA employee was $148,000. Quite the pay ratio gap. And it's not like this was a bonus for big growth because the company had stayed relatively the same. It was basically just a reward for himself. Other top executives got fat bonuses as well. Business as usual, multi-million-dollar bonuses as layoffs rolled through the company. And just when you thought the story couldn't get more corporate, it did, because a new kind of player stepped onto the field.
What do you have fun doing?
Video games.
Oh, what's that? Video games.
Video games.
You're a big gamer.
Since I'm a kid, I love it.
Really?
Yeah, it disconnects me from reality.
Yeah, he does disconnect from reality when gaming. He also disconnects people's heads from their bodies. You know what? Never mind. Saudi Arabia's public investment fund announced a $55 billion buyout of EA, taking it private. Brokered by Nepo baby Jared Kushner, because of course it is. And when the deal closes, CEO Andrew Wilson walks away with $105.9 million. Now to be fair, that's not a bonus. It's his shares and stock options finally cashing out. Nice payout for a guy who turned FIFA into a slot machine, fought European governments over children's gambling, shut down studios and laid off thousands of workers. Almost $106 million. Now compare that with the average employee. Are we really supposed to believe that he provided 700 times more value or worked 700 times harder than the average EA employee? You know, the ones who write the code, design the games, create the actual art? And here's the ironic part. EA was supposed to be the creative one, the one that treated programmers like visionaries and games like art. But now, when people hear EA, they think greed, exploitation, broken launches, studio closures. The very things Trip Hawkins built EA against. But the poison, the business practices that EA developed over the years has also changed the gaming industry itself. Because EA discovered something that the rest of the industry started to copy. You can turn a $60 purchase into a $600 relationship. It was just 40 years ago when Trip Hawkins dreamed of building a home for artists, asking, can a computer make you cry? And now the question is, how many times can we make you pay?